So our last panel for LandPac. And ladies and gentlemen, we have saved the best for last. Throughout the last 2 days, every panel, every keynote has addressed sustainment and its associated challenges. And as the old adage says, amateurs talk tactics, but professionals talk logistics. This panel is titled Creating and Maintaining Joint Interior Lines, Sustainment in Competition, Crisis, and Conflict. Our moderator, Lieutenant General retired Tony Crutchfield, Vice President, Army Systems, Boeing. And Tony joined Boeing in July 2017 as Vice President, Army Systems, Defense, Space, and Security for Boeing Government Operations in Arlington, Virginia. He serves as the company's Senior Army Liaison, informing business division leadership teams of customer perspectives for strategy and technology investment. Prior to joining Boeing, Tony served in the United States Army for over 34 years. He commanded units at every echelon of the Army, including the 10th Mountain Division's Aviation Brigade, Commanding General of the Army's Aviation Center, Fort Novosel, Alabama, and his last assignment before retiring was right here as Deputy Commander, United States PACOM. Tony is also one of LandPac's original plank holders, and he has supported every LandPac since the very beginning. So please join me in a warm welcome for Lieutenant General Tony Crutchfield and the panel.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks again, Jack. And I do want to just very quickly say thanks, of course, to AUSA for everything they do, especially setting up LandPac, General Brown, General Flynn, Mr. Diaz. Thank you all to our allied senior leaders. Thank you all for being here today. And probably more importantly, I want to thank the gentleman on the stage with me. What a meaty topic this is. So let me jump right into it and just introduce who's on the stage. I don't think the person on my right needs to be introduced. General Mike Minahan, Minnie, who's the commander of Air Mobility Command, and Mike and Minnie and I served together while we were here at U.S. PACOM. It's great to see you again, too. To his right is Lieutenant General Derek McCauley, the Canadian Armed Forces. He's the Deputy Commander of United Nations Command in Korea. To his right, Major General Jared Helwig, who's the Commanding General of 8th Theater Sustainment Command, United States Army. And I am going to go ahead and say it. He has recently been nominated for his 3rd star and Deputy Commander Transport. Congratulations from all of us. And then to his right, of course, Major General retired Steve Shapiro, Vice President and General Manager of LogCap Operations V2X. So thank you again for being here, and thank you all for joining us today. As we talk about the challenges in this theater of creating and maintaining joint interior lines, sustainment in crisis and conflict, I don't think we could have pulled a better group together, AUSA. I don't think we could pull a better group together of people who understand this topic and have the experience to share with us today. I encourage each of you to review their bios at your leisure. You know, as we sit here today in this theater, we all are aware of all the threats that face us. And the theater itself, as was said here this week, creates additional challenges for us. Someone said earlier, I don't know if it was one of the keynotes, I think it was General Flynn, who talked about effective deterrence. And for that deterrence, you have to have strength. And to have that strength, in my opinion, you have to sustain it. You have to be prepared to sustain it for a long duration. And that's why we're here today, to talk about those problems and possible some solutions for that. I'd also, before we start with the questions, I also want to throw out something that you may or may not know. Mr. Bang hit on some of it, but OSD, Officer Secretary of Defense, U.S. Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Chris Lohman, is creating what he's calling a Regional Sustainment Framework, or RSF, across the geographic combatant commands. That's to identify the shortfalls and capability gaps in each region and develop strategies to build and enhance operations in theater, given the potential threats that they face. It's a comprehensive sustainment strategy that'll make up partnerships with countries in the regions and also with defense industries. And so perhaps if we could talk about your thoughts on that RSF, that regional sustainment framework. But let me jump right off and ask General Helwig, could you just take a few moments to share with us some of the challenges that you face day to day in doing the job that you do here for this combatant command?
Thank you, sir. I think it's been highlighted throughout the week, the terms tyranny of distance, the challenges of seeing, sensing early, and having in position the required logistics, in this case, to be able to meet the requirements. And that plays itself out, regionally. And as you look in the different, sectors of our theater, you see just the distances that have to be traveled, the capabilities that have to be put into place, established early to provide that type of capability and credibility in that first and second island chain to make a difference in the early portions of any crisis or conflict scenario that would have to that would emerge. General Flynn talks a lot about building joint interior lines. And so the practice of building joint interior lines, there's 4 main areas: C2, intel, protection, and sustainment. And so for the 8th TSC in particular, protection, because we've got the MPs and the engineers, and then sustainment are important parts of realizing building those joint interior lines. And so we've got to be in position, using operation pathways to pull the required capabilities into position, whether that be in Japan, where we've got a pretty good established network already, to our partners in the Philippines, and then down into Australia. And I think yesterday there was a great, General Stewart put up the picture of the batteries from multiple countries firing different HIMARS and capabilities as part of Talisman Sabre 23. And I think that's a great illustration, a little bit of the challenge. You see that picture, you see those great arcs, you hear about the interoperability of the systems. To get those systems in place and in position was about a 9-month process of everything from agricultural inspections to the actual movement of that equipment from multiple countries: Japan, Korea, the United States, and then Australia. It required coordination with port activities, customs clearances and brokers, transportation on road networks, and all of that synchronized by a combined joint theater sustainment component that work together to get those pieces and elements and the munitions in. And there was nothing more satisfying than seeing those missiles launch off when we were about a day's work of making sure that everything was in position to be able to make that happen. So synchronizing all of that is really the challenge in the Pacific. How do you make those things, all those elements come together at the right place at the right time to make a difference?
You mentioned, of course, you mentioned the challenges, and you did mention a couple of ways that we're addressing those challenges. Could I ask maybe each of you, maybe starting with General McCauley, what are the things you think not only the U.S. but its partners and allies, what things can they do to help establish and create a joint interior lines for sustainment and PACOM? What are the things that you believe they can do? What are the things that maybe have been done that you think are good examples of how we need to progress in the future?
Well, hey, thanks, Tony. First of all, honor and privilege to be with these fine gentlemen. I'm not a logistician. I'm a cavalry officer, so I've probably consumed enough sustainment, but not necessarily talk about it. But nonetheless, maybe I'm the comic relief on the panel. No, listen, great opportunity over the last couple of years when I was Vice J3 CENTCOM to see the power of organizations to bring logistics to bear and sustainment at time of need. And I think we can all I'll look back on the last couple of years and see the regions in which we had a huge effect. And sorry, I say we as the United States in this manner. And so as I jumped over to Korea and a different type of coalition, the United Nations Command, I started to see some chinks in the armor. And, you kind of spoke to it. And to set up what I think, and certainly I'm not an expert in the RSF, and I understand, it dropped officially yesterday, but looking at the 3 priorities and the strength in regional partnerships, that key one, I'm drawn to where I am right now in Korea and how United Nations Command fits in that and the member states. I think it's really important, probably for the audience, and certainly General Menahan doesn't need to be schooled on this. He knows quite well what United Nations Command is, but there's a lot of people that think we report to the United Nations, which is actually untrue. United Nations Command was established in 1950 under a Security Resolution 84, which basically adopted a unified command under American leadership. And it had the authority to utilize the UN flag and the flags of the nations that participated. And those nations were 22 in number for the Korean War. So 71 years later, we're still a unified command, still under American leadership, and our authorities come from that resolution, but also the domestic authorities from each nation that are represented. So in fact, right now we have 17 of the 22 still represented, 11 of which are in the headquarters. And it's those domestic authorities that we operate on in order to execute the mandate in support, in this case, of enforcement of the armistice. But really, UNC is there to, in time of crisis, coordinate the capabilities and the materiel from member states in support of the ROC and the U.S. And so as you get into that question on how and what and where it comes to, where I see some of the work that has been done, but certainly the work I think that needs to be focused upon as we move forward, specifically in sustainment, and I would offer certainly in this region, is those authorities. It's enabling our coalition partners, our allies, to actually participate. Because at this point in time, it's hard to support a plan if you don't know the plan. And so when you talk about mutual support logistics agreements, when you talk about a SOFA, when you talk about a visiting force agreement, those don't always exist for the countries that the United States are partnered with. Certainly, most all have those with the United States, but they may not have it with your allies that you want to come with you. And those aren't our responsibility, those are bilateral agreements. And I think that's a key component that we have to continue to think about, is how do we enable that now instead of at time of need, because it'll be too late. And so, I see this in Korea right now, where my boss, General Paul LaCamera, is focused on getting the partnership with not only the United States and the ROC, but the member states that have recommitted, just as early as or late as last year, recommitted to security of the peninsula at time of need. But they don't know what they don't know, which is they don't know what they may have to bring. They don't know what they may have to support. And so when you get into the joint interior lines, those lines are pretty long. And when you got some countries that are in member states that are in Europe or in Colombia, for example, and how do you sort of crack that nut? So I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing right now, and certainly occasions like this to discuss it and move forward, and certainly senior leaders talking to our political decision makers of the importance of them getting those agreements in order to allow us to not only operate, but sustain, support, and win.
When you were talking, it just brought up one of those memories that make you shiver. It's like, I remember specifically working on that here in PACOM to try to make those agreements with many countries. And one in particular that I had the experience of working with India to get the communications agreement that we were trying to establish, the sustainment agreement that we're trying to establish. And I do remember how important that was. I think you are on to one of the key elements of making sure that the theater is what we call set, right? That is probably the first step that you got to do to try to set it. So thank you for your thoughts. Now, I'll tell you, General Minahan, you have an awful big responsibility. Your responsibility around the world, of course, but in particular here with the challenges that we've talked about. What are the things that that challenge you in your command in making sure that this theater is supported and has the sustainment that it needs?
Thank you. If I may lead off with a little bit of appreciation for a few folks here. First to Charlie and Jamie, thanks for having me out here. It's great to be back. When I talked to Charlie a few days ago, he said, "Hey man, you're bringing a South swell." And I was like, I'll take full credit for that, but also I have to take credit for the biblical rain that's happening right now. So you're welcome, everybody. Certainly to AUSA, although not a member but a participant, I think this is my second or third time as we've done this throughout the years in my roles here on the island, and so I'm grateful to be back. So for what you all do, thank you very much. For our partners and allies specifically in the room, it's just a joy to be around you. Certainly in occasions like these, but most importantly when we're out there operating in this AOR. So your presence here is extremely meaningful. To General Crutchfield, sir, thanks for babysitting obnoxious young brigadier general back in the day. I was the J-30 while you were the DCOM. It was a treat. The people in the audience are going to figure this out as you mature through your career, is that this is all about relationships. And to be able to fall in after being gone, almost 3 years now, and to come back and say, I work for General Crutchfield. Steve and I went to the Army War College together. Jared and I, as the J4, when he was the J4 at Indo-PACOM and then the TSC, got a lot of reps. And then the shared experience that Derek and I have in Korea, and so you will eventually be up on this stage and you will be able to fall back on the relationships that you developed over the years, and that's a pretty cool thing. Yeah. Mike Minahan, I'm blessed to have served in this theater for over 10 years, 2 tours, almost 4 years in Korea, a tour at PACAF as the Deputy 3. I flew up and was the J-30 at Indo-PACOM, went back to Korea, served for General Brooks and General Abrams as the Chief of Staff out there, came back, was the Chief of Staff at Indo-PACOM, and then flew up to DCOM. All that's 10 years, and all that is the only reason I'm on this stage right now. The only reason that they picked a pudgy C-130 pilot to be the Air Mobility Command commander is because of my experience in the Pacific. And so you lay that over with what my roles are. I basically have 4 things to do. I'm the airlift, I'm the air refueling, I'm the aeromedical evacuation, and I'm the global air mobility support system, which is all the stuff on the ground that has to happen to make the stuff in the air happen. So think about maintenance, think about port, think about the logistics side of that, all fall under my umbrella here. So I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this, and then see how you guys react. And I'm going to make this a personal, professional challenge to anybody in the audience that disagrees with me here, okay? So the Air Mobility Command is the most relied upon force in the history of warfare. Let that sit. Okay? I'm not coming from you from a point of arrogance, okay? Nor am I coming at you seeking sympathy, okay? But I am coming at you with everybody's success depends on us to make them successful. Okay? And so that's both a comment on the magnitude of the role that my airmen and our teams have to do, but it's also a comment on what's at stake if we don't get this right. And I'm certain that was a major discussion point throughout the last couple of days here. So if we don't get this right, we are not going to be in a position to be successful. And so when I say we are the most relied upon force in the history of warfare, I say that's my obligation to put a team on the field that's ready to go. And the only way I can do that is to be present in this theater now when it's competition. I'll talk about a little bit more about that later. I want to talk about maneuver here for a second. And we talked in the intro, we said, amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics, victors study maneuver. If you want to be victorious, you better snuggle up to this maneuver thing, okay? So I am the maneuver for the Joint Force. Okay, I did not say I'm the only, and I'm certainly appreciative of the other echelons that get it done. But if you want meaningful maneuver in this theater, It's going to rely on the 110,000 total force airmen of Air Mobility Command. Again, not a position of arrogance, just facts. Facts. And so the challenge here is if you think differently, you can bring it up in a question, or you can send me an email, certainly. After what I went through last year, I can take anything, trust me. I can take it. So that's also a challenge to the mirror check, okay? And an enormous commitment to combine my experience with the opportunity that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force gave me when he said he promoted me the morning before I took over command, and he said, go faster. Not a comment on my predecessor, but a comment on the operational environment and the changing importance and the appreciation of the challenge in this theater. So, I am the maneuver. We're the most relied upon force. It's upon me and the wonderful Air Mobility Total Force team to absolutely grasp all of the challenges. We certainly talked about a number of them here. So in some of the follow-on chat we're going to do, I'll get into the details of that. But to round out where I started, to say thank you for the opportunity to be on the stage, and I look forward to the follow-on. Thank you.
You know, so you hit something, sir. So speed and sustainability of that speed. If you read anything in history, any wars of any armies, those are critical things to win. The tempo. Tempo. And to have the tempo, you have to have the sustainment. What we're talking about here today.
You got it.
I was at one of these shows, and I can't remember the speaker, but they said it kind of tongue-in-cheek. They said, you know, sustainment in crisis and conflict and contested logistics used to be called war. I mean, that's what they said. I thought that was a great comment. If you think about it, that's what it is. So I want to kind of pull on that and ask Steve, if you would, to talk about this in terms of, you know, interior lines is a doctrinal term, right?
I had to Google it. I'm an airman, sorry.
Well, it is a doctrinal term. Steve, how do you see contractors creating and maintaining interior lines in support of this joint force effort?
So thank you for the question. And again, thank you so much for allowing me to be on this panel. And you know, I've retired 4 years now, and I love coming to AUSA, love staying connected, and I love complex questions. I love the dialogue. Keeps you mentally aware. So thank you so much. A caveat, 35 years in the Army, I'm a European-based guy. So I'm a former TSC commander out of K-Town, and I've used for G4 most of my time in Europe. What I would say is this, and here we are, you can call it competition, you can call it phase 0, but we're setting the conditions for phase 3 for that maneuver. I couldn't agree with you more, sir, so I'm not going to give you a question afterwards, but my perspective has changed. It changed a little bit in Europe, but it's changing now, especially since I'm a vendor here in Europe, in Indo-PACOM. When we talk about allies and partners here, and we talked about it when I was a TSC commander, it was a standard allies and partners. But I think in this theater especially, if we don't consider vendors like log cap vendors like V2X or others as partners and bring them in early, you won't get to that maneuver. You won't be able to refuel at a certain place if you don't have that DLA contract to refuel you on that end. And you've got to set those conditions in phase 0. When I think about our corporate presence here, we are, sir, your biggest presence in the Philippines. Sir, we are your biggest presence in Thailand. We are part of your force posture. We are in your line and block chart. If we are not in your line and block chart, sir, in your line and block chart, we're making a mistake. And I think I feel very well embedded in here. And so one of my tasks, everybody's got their tactical tasks in your line and block chart. One of my biggest tactical tasks is getting a business license in the countries that you want to operate in. And not just the countries you're operating in, but those you're thinking about operating in. So one of my operations guys is here in the audience right now. Step 1, go join the American Chamber of Commerce in that country. Let's find out who's who in the zoo. I'm going to fly in there, and I'm going to go do an embassy engagement to find out and meet with the econ guys. Don't want to meet with the ambassador. Don't want to meet with the Paul Mill guys. I want to meet with the econ guys to find out what it's going to take for me to get my business license and get my presence established. So then when a brigade comes in to Luzon for an exercise, I'm there. and they're being fed. And if they need to atomize throughout the battlefield and go do fires, they can communicate because we're going to set the conditions for them to communicate. So the perspective as an Indo-PACOM partner, and also we have CENTCOM as a CENTCOM partner, is setting those conditions in phase 0 or in competition for both strategic maneuver and operational maneuver. And I think, and I separate those, and coming from Europe, it was really about operational maneuver, but in this theater, your strategic maneuver, so you can get to operational maneuver, is a challenge that we didn't have. In theory, we had won the Battle of the Atlantic in the 40s, and we've not really given back that territory to wolf packs or U-boats. So you have that additional. You've got to win the Battle of the Atlantic on this side of the world. So that's my perspective, and it's changed. But it really started changing when I was in Europe. We had the NATO construct, and I would go to Brussels, and I would go meet with NATO, and I was preaching to the choir. At a certain point, you've got to stop doing that. I started going to Brussels and going to the EU. And I would meet with my counterparts in the EU, preaching to the congregation, to do things like customs that are very hard for you. I mean, just to get into a place. And all these things, so the EU mindset was something that I brought on. It became a commercial mindset, and it translated very well to my current position. But that's a theater mindset that we have to have here to be successful, to maneuver and dominate the battlefield.
I'm going to shift a little bit to the training and preparation for what we're talking about. And I'd like for General McCauley, you to address this, and General Howard, you to address this. And I may be dated. I'm one of those old guys you mentioned there, Minnie, but I do recall in my experience when we did war games and war fighters, we kind of played lip service to the sustainment, right? We did these big hand waves. And on that last day of the warfighter, when everybody was packing up, General Brown remembers he led us. Everybody's packing up, and all of a sudden, everything we needed showed up at the spot we needed when we needed to end the war and be successful. You all remember that? Big hand waves. So I want to ask both of you, I'm hoping that's changed. If it hasn't, tell us. And tell us, what are we doing in exercises to better prepare us for all the things you're talking about? General McCauley, I throw it over to you first, sir.
Yeah, great question. And I'll caveat this by saying, I've only been in this theater for about 5 months, and so it's what I have seen or what I have been privileged to kind of discuss with my colleagues or those professionals. I do think there's progress being made from what you talked about. When you look at earlier on this week, we've talked a lot about interoperability and how does that play out. I think you identified the fact of just how it was to get to Talisman Sabre and the success out of that. And I think those are examples, the Talisman Sabres, the Cobra Golds, and an exercise that I've participated in anyway, the Freedom Shields, where we're seeing the fact that we're not just discussing it, we're actually starting to practice it. And I think that's the key right now, is we have to incorporate that into the exercises, to actually physically do it, not just discuss it. Because it's easy to, as I say, sprinkle fairy dust on it. And international agreements are in place, partnerships are there. We understand the problem, and it just goes away, and magically the war goes on. And I think those are key facts where I'm seeing, and certainly in this theater, and like I said, I'm a victim of where I sit from my perspective. I see General LaCamera who has a triple-hatted requirement to be commander of 3 different commands at once, where he understands that he needs to have not only his commands, but the ROC leadership understand the importance of the sustainment of the fight. And I would tell you that I've been pleasantly surprised by our ROC partners, and they're seized with understanding some of the lessons and some of the current conflicts and some of the challenges that sustainment has brought. And opening up, if you will, the map of Korea is not just the border of South Korea, it's moving outwards. And so, I think, as you said, There has been previously, and certainly throughout my career, I've seen that where we sprinkled that fairy dust. But what I'm seeing here, because of, I think, the exercises and the nature in which we're linking them together, and the importance of having discussions as professionals, that we're actually practicing it versus just sort of putting out as a secondary effect.
Joel, would you like to address that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so, Talisman Sabre, for example, last year, the opening ceremony was in August of 23, but Talisman Sabre began November of 22 when we downloaded a vessel in Hawaii and started the process to clean the equipment to get it ready for eventual movement into Australia and implementation into the exercise. And so I think part of the conversation's got to be looking at the exercise not just as the opening ceremony to the closing ceremony, but as the sum total of the effort it takes to get into and out of an exercise. And to be intentional about measuring that and understanding where the friction points are and what that really requires the sustainment warfighting function to do is to get into the exercise design early enough to put those logistics training objectives into the exercise itself so that it's not something that we do to support the exercise, it's actually part of the exercise itself. When we do that, we see a lot more recognition, and obviously it'll compete with whatever else that exercise's objectives are. But if it's considered as a no kidding part of the exercise, an objective to be reached, something that needs to be timed, understood, the requisite command and control has got to be put in place. And a lot of times what we'll do in those exercises is kind of go bare minimum on what we need for sustainment. But what we found, at least in 23, and I think going forward, is we've got to put into place the architecture that's going to be required in crisis and conflict, and then rehearse it so that we know where the points of friction are and what we need to do to scale appropriately and in the right places. And not only from an Army perspective, but particularly in this theater, this is where, to give General Minahan the momentum he needs, we've got to be very intentional about linking, for example, Talisman Sabre with the AMC exercise, Mobility Guardian, so that as he's exercising his capabilities, the right ground support that the Army is going to provide using Army support to other services is in place, and then we rehearse that connection point, which is a critical point of potential failure if we don't understand what that means. We've got to resupply the fuel that he needs in those tankers to the airbase for him to then take it from the fence line of the airbase into the aircraft that he's got. And so typically we don't view that as a training objective of the exercise, but going forward and in this current process, we've got to do that. The other really critical part is across all of our sustainment, regardless of what service it is, 75, depending on the service, about 75% of our critical logistics is in the reserve component. So if we're not intentional about pulling those things in early, getting those forces in place, and understanding how we exercise them, we'll miss a great opportunity to really take advantage of that. And then the partners and allies piece is another thing. We have to put into, so those agreements that General Shapiro talked about, we have to take the theoretical and apply the practical to it. We have to do a strategic level, for lack of a better term, dime drill or washer drill that many of us remember, where you order a part and you see where it stops in that chain.
Yeah.
So you know where those points of failure are and what you have to do with either embassy or the Chamber of Commerce or where the friction point is. And I think that'll take on a greater significance with this regional sustainment framework as well, because we'll want to intentionally think about, okay, let's, instead of ordering that part from a depot in the United States, how do we get that part from a local partner or a regional sustainment framework? That doesn't happen naturally, and it doesn't happen magically. It takes an actual intentional training objective applied to an exercise with a goal that the team can grasp and work. So we have to think about that ahead. We can't just wait till something breaks and say, okay, now let's order a part. We have to think about, let's order a part. Whether we use it or not, we need to understand whether it, how did it get there? Is it available? And use that opportunity to really learn where those points of friction are. And the final piece I would say is connecting our region is very important. So we also have to apply, if we're going to use commercial vessels, for example, offshore support vessels or other means of moving forces around the region, then we have to apply that in our exercise construct, use that capability, understand the contracts, their limitations, and what they do so we can continue to refine them and get to a point where we understand exactly what it means when, on a PowerPoint slide it says, X number of these kind of vessels are going to help us in a crisis situation. Until we actually do it, we won't know where those critical points of failure are.
I appreciate you tying in the RSF too, because from what I read, and I'm not the expert on it, I'm just trying to get smart on it. The example you gave, I believe, is what Mr. Lohman is trying to do, is having those things set up forward so you don't have to send something all the way back to depot. It can be created in, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so in Talisman Sabre, we had a tank that was involved. There was a commercial, it was being moved by commercial head, and it got into an accident, and there was some significant damage to that tank. The traditional approach would be take it, put it back on the vessel, broken, send it back to the mainland and fix it in CONUS. What we were able to do with our partners was, they have tanks, with Australia, they have tanks, we have tanks, there are some common parts, and we were able to work, I would say about 80% of the components required to put that tank back into action. Now, we didn't get it fully mission capable, but we learned a whole heck of a lot about what it would take through the exchange of AXA agreements, contracting pieces, and how would you then use the existing supply system in the region to at least get after that solution set. And then we used both the material and then the mechanics from Australia in this case to work on that. And we learned a whole heck of a lot about what that's going to take in the future. And so that's just one example, but and that was an example that just kind of happened. But I think being intentional about that in the future and saying, okay, maybe instead of doing our annual maintenance service check on a piece of equipment in Korea, we move it to Thailand and do that, to see how does this work. Can we get the parts? Can we get the labor? Can we get the whole thing put together? And that will teach us a whole lot about how that actually can materialize into a functional construct.
Yes, sir.
Sir, if it's okay, if I pull on a few threads here. Yes. The first would be, Jared is spot on in the synchronization piece. I'll give you an example here. Air Mobility Command is going to support everybody's agility concept. So, we're going to do not only do ACE for the Air Force, we're going to support ACE for the Air Force. We're going to be 100%, doing MDTFs for the Army. We're going to do AABO for the Marine Corps, and then we're going to do DMO for the Navy. So, that merge of synchronization is an enormous assumption. And any effort that we can do to start turning those into facts, that is the righteous, lonely, difficult path that we need to go on. When I took over, I formulated 2 problem statements for my team to get around as we try to be worthy of the responsibilities we've been given. And the first problem statement would be, we're not ready to fight and win inside the first island chain. And the second problem statement would then be, the joint force is not as ready, integrated, or agile as it thinks it is. So I've got a few years hauling cargo in support of the joint team. So I've got, an opinion on everybody's readiness, including Air Force readiness. But what we endeavor to do is really take a look at all the things that are going on right now. I'll just give you an example. I came out and took the AAR coming out of the Kabul evacuation. After Kabul evacuation, we went straight into the Ukraine support. After Ukraine support, we went straight into the Israel support. After Israel support, or during Israel support, which continues certainly, as well as Ukraine, we transitioned to doing some humanitarian operations in Gaza. The whole time that's going on, we've got enormous amount of exercises, including the ones that you mentioned, Talisman Sabre, Massa, Northern Edge, all the things that happen in this theater. We added on Mobility Guardian. Bamboo Eagle are a series of exercises that are really robust. Oh, by the way, Haiti's going down, Chad's going down, Niger going down. Stop me when you heard enough, okay? So this is actually good tension, because as difficult as that is all to handle, it pales into comparison of what's going to go down in this theater, regardless of the potential adversary. It's an enormous endeavor. So I'll use Mobility Guardian as the sinking mechanism here. So we came into theater. I believe that you can only appreciate this theater if you've been in this theater. Everybody talks about the tyranny of distance. That's not the deal. It's the tyranny of water. Okay, the tyranny of distance exists in Europe too. There's a NATO runway every 50 miles. I'm sorry, 100 kilometers. Every 100 kilometers. Everywhere you turn around, and there's decades of interaction of an alliance, And so we really have some enormous challenges. They're not insurmountable, but the only way you can know this theater is to get into it. So Mobility Guardian was an exercise that happened over the mainland every other year and inside of Air Mobility Command. We put it in the Pacific, put it in the theater of consequence, so that you could appreciate the tyrannies of distance and the tyrannies of water, so that you had to interact with the Marines doing Mazda, the Army doing Talisman Sabre, the Navy doing Northern Edge, and I know that those are all joint in nature. So it's intentionally trying to provide tension on this synchronization piece, okay? And we've got to get to a point where we're comfortable letting it fail. It sucks when you can sense that, when you've put enormous time, effort, and energy into an exercise, but we will not learn the lessons we need to learn until we let these things kick our butts so that we can get better. So 70 airplanes, 3,000 airmen came from Air Mobility Command. Total force, we are dominant with Guard and Reserve in our echelons too. And bring them in the theater with the minimum amount of equipment so we could maximize the other people's equipment that needed to get into theater. So we weren't just bringing in our kit. We were focused on all the services getting into theater. And we did not give ourselves, like in a normal exercise, enough time so that you jumped in. I'm Air Force, so first thing we're gonna do is go into crew rest, investigate the cappuccino machines, all those other things. That we intentionally made it so that your deploy to employ had 0 time in between. And that the units that understood what it took to land, reset their airplanes, launch another crew out, go find the vol, go find the mission, go find the cargo, go find the echelon that needs supporting, those were successful. And the units that weren't that good in the transition had mission failures, okay? And we learned a lot about ourselves. So this is both a comment on AMC, the Air Force, the Joint Team. So what I can say is that we are ready to fight and win inside the first island chain, but we got to make it so the advantage is extreme, okay? And we have improved the Joint Forces readiness, integration, and agility, but I'm going to steal a line from Admiral Paparo because I love it. He says he will never admit to being ready enough, okay? And so to twist it just a little bit, I will never admit to being ready enough, integrated enough, or agile enough. And I will never relax, ever, not once, even when I'm retired. I won't relax on this synchronization of how this is all supposed to come together. So in the AAR of Mobility Guardian and the AR of all those things that I listed out, 3 things come true. One, as always, is command relationships. I don't think it's asking too much for our forces to know who they're working for and what the priorities are. Yet we always get in a position where we can tangled up in COMRO. We never get off a slide 2, and we confuse the force that needs to be freed by that decision. We need to free our NCOs and our young CGOs to make wonderful decisions and operate under mission type orders and just execute with reckless abandon, okay? And so we've got to get this COMRO right. C2, it goes without saying most of this discussion is about C2. But we got to be able to understand what's going on. We got to be able to understand the tempo. We got to understand if the tempo is good enough to win. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to suck less. okay? And then the final one is this, we're calling it explode into theater, which is a fancier way really to say fundamentals. Can we really do the things that we're supposed to do? Okay? Can we explode into theater? It's a CONUS-based force, okay? And it's a force, even in this theater, that has to transit great distances of water. And can we put it in position of advantage so that it can be lethal, so we can, one, demonstrate America's will, and two, we can provide that deterrence lens, but also to drive that decisive victory. The readiness that delivers deterrence is the same readiness that delivers decisive victory, okay? I hope the fight never comes, but if it does, whatever the adversary is, I want it to be the worst decision they've ever made. So this synchronization and this tension on allowing the force to not white card the logistics. So what I learned from, you might have heard of these people, B.B. Bell, Skip Sharp, Abe Abrams, Vince Brooks, is I learned this rehearsal of concept where you can't hide behind a white card. There is no running away as a commander from your preparation, your plan, your ability to execute when you do a rehearsal. And so this rehearsal to the point of letting it fail forward, allowing commanders to take risks, also allowing them to move forward after they learn something, I think is critical. So thank you.
You know, I tell you what, I agree with you on the fail. Not only fail fast and learn. And that is absolutely true. Before I throw it over to you, Steve, I just want to remind folks that bring your questions up and we'll ask the panel. I've got a few here that I'll start asking the panel, but go ahead and
I want to just
comment.
Pull on some of these strings. We support exercises here. You know, we're right now in Bala-Catan, Salakhanib. We supported Talisman Sabre. Before the ship landed, we were training on how to, with the Australians, and how to clean the equipment. And so getting ahead of the exercises so that we can be prepared to support your training. But when we're supporting your training, months in advance, we're training ourselves. And so I have learned, again, since I've retired, the training of the commercial workforce is a big deal, especially in this theater, because every time you do something, it's like you're doing it for the first time. It's a very unique thing. And so I appreciate, Jared, you have, through the exercise process, the initial planning conference, mid, and then the final planning conference, we were brought in after the final planning conference on a lot of these exercises, and we were rushing. And so we became a one-trick pony. But when we got into the mid-planning conference at your direction, we were able to then look at other vendors in the region. And so when we talk about, again, we talk about maneuver, we're talking about interior lines, but the interior lines that we're trying to create, depending on whatever your task is supported by a web of industry, a web of partners. And so the more we train, the more we get to develop that web. Again, that web is inside your line of block chart. It is not my web. I am a part of a web that supports the Indo-PACOM commander or the USAPAC commander or the TSC commander. But the exercises have really, for my corporation, driven us to create, if you would, it's a giant spreadsheet of all potential vendors to do every potential task that we've got to the point where about a year ago, and if you ever want to see a war game run by a bunch of neophytes, you come by our headquarters. Because we're taking people who've been in commercial industry all their lives, some of them for 5 years, some of them for 15 years, and we ran an Indo-PACOM war game. What happens if this plan goes down, to include the pen, what are our tasks? And we ran through there, we ran through enemy forces, and we continue to train ourselves to create this web. We're going to run it again in October, but this is a complex problem that's going to require everybody on their game on day one, and the more you bring industry in, the more we'll be able to support that. And I know I'm making a plug for industry. I've been doing it for 4 years. I've had 3 jobs in my life. I was a waiter, I was in the Army, and now I work for V2X. And I will tell you, they don't build on each other, but I've learned a lot in this. And if I could go back, and know then what I know now, I would be much more successful. Or if we could run an exchange program, I think we spoke about this. If I could put 3 of my employees on the Indo-PACOM staff and take 3 Indo-PACOM field grade officers and put them on my staff for 2 years, now go back and be great, we'd all be a lot greater. But bringing us in early and letting us train before you train and train with you has made this theater, I think, dramatically better during your tenure. And if I could do it all over again, I would do more of it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to go to some audience questions here, and I'm going to start with Joe Minahan because this question came in as you were discussing from your last comments, and you covered some of it, but I think there's a focus here I'd like for you to take a look at. And the question is, what have you seen or learned in connecting strategic movement to operational maneuver, and how does that create a deterrent effect?
I've learned that in the business that I come from, that we focus too much on tip fid and a simple mathematical equation and have not focused enough on the maneuver. You know, that what it takes to put our capabilities in a position of advantage so that they can be lethal. And the complexities of the water, the complexities of the distances, the complexity of the enemy order of battle here, you know, are going to put us in a position where we are going to have to really embrace this operational maneuver. So I've learned that shift can happen, but it takes a dedicated effort and a strong callus or a thick callus on your forehead as you try to just push against the decades of lessons that we've learned where we had uncontested lines of communications. We had 6 months, you know, the American way of fighting was give me 6 months to line up my stuff and we'll meet on a corner and I'll kick your butt. I mean, and that ain't gonna happen in this thing. So what it means to really explode into theater, demonstrate America's will, demonstrate America's readiness, demonstrate America's might. And it's not just about securing your initial position. We've got to have the second, the third, the fourth moves in mind. And then we've got to take something that's very complex and reduce it to something that 03s and below can just do on their own. They understand commander's intent. They understand the giant scheme of maneuver. They understand how they fit in with the joint force, okay? This is not about a service, okay? When I describe my journey of 10 years in the Pacific here, all but 2 years was in a combatant command. So this is about purple and combined warfare with partners and allies. And we quickly can get into some stovepipe discussions about services. And in this fight especially, it's about the joint lethality that comes together that can operate at a tempo required to win. And so as we come out of the strategic and understand what we need to do as operational commanders to make the tactical echelon successful, I'm happy with the progress we've made. This is the way I describe, this is the way I grade my own team. You guys can interpret it to however you want for the teams that you represent. From where we were to where we are, I give it an A+. It's a comment on the professionalism, it's a comment on integration, it's a comment on collaboration, it's a comment on deep planning that's finally getting to where it wants to get. But when we talk about where we are to where we need to be, it's a C-. It's my GPA at Auburn, okay? So that's only a comment on the distance that we've got to close. It's not a comment on the collaboration, the integration, and such things. So that foundation exists to propel us to the next level. I am fully confident that whoever takes after me will continue to get it going. There are certain things that I want to do. You know, I'll talk about this later. I've got about 3.5 months remaining on active duty before I'm Mr. Minahan and I'm bitching about commissary parking spots and pharmacy wait lines. But I'm told that's what we do.
That's what we do.
Yeah, okay, all right.
It is.
So you know, I'm gonna pass that flag on that stage in September with not an ounce of energy left because there is work to do here, and this is what operational commanders do. They set the conditions so that the tactical echelons underneath them can be successful. You know, I exist to make my wing successful, and this team exists to make the joint force and the coalition successful. So I've learned it's a long road. It's a challenge we can handle, but there's still much more work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jim McCauley. Sir, how do we bridge the gap with our partners and allies when it comes to sustainment, synchronization, and creating a common operating picture?
Well, I think it's the foundation, and if I didn't mention this probably on this panel, I'd have to give my coalition membership card in. It really gets to the basis of anything, whether it's sustainment, whether it's operations. It's about info sharing. And you know, this is the portion that we continually are trying to break down. beating our heads against the wall in some cases. And that's not the coalition. That's, in some cases, I would offer the United States trying to break down policy that has been made that they're supposed to enact. And it's those things. If I'll give you the greatest example right now, and from a Korean perspective. We've got 17 member states that have committed to coming to the assistance and aid to the Korean people, to the United States of America, on the Korean Peninsula in time of crisis. None of them know the plan. So you have to now ask yourself, how are we asking the members to support us? How are we asking them to bring in effect, to bring a capability to achieve whatever we want to achieve, but they don't know. So what materiel do they bring? What materiel do they prioritize? What do they, and what are they supposed to do as far as their industrial base? What is their part of this enterprise? And so, there is a lot of people doing great work to push forward. And my boss is doing that to push and has the commitment of the ROC leadership to move towards that, to have portions of the plan releasable. And I think, the biggest thing we can do now in synchronizing and able to support the warfighter is actually right to release. Mm-hmm. Have a plan that's right to release. Mm-hmm. And I fully understand and been around long enough that there's elements that'll never be releasable. But I think you can all agree that if you're asking our coalition partners to be prepared, be ready, and be there on time, and we'll tell you what the plan is later, I think we might be missing the target.
Well, that's a good point. I appreciate those thoughts. General Helwig, if you will, could you please describe the Joint Regional Distribution Centers and how they might help build joint interior lines?
Yeah, thanks. So Joint Theater Distribution Centers give us an opportunity to put materiel in position that give us capability for any crisis or contingency that might come, from HADR to full conflict. We are intentionally looking at these locations through a joint lens. What we don't want to have at each theater distribution center, for example, is 4 stovepipes of excellence. Can Army mechanics work on Air Force air-ground equipment? Yes. Can Army forklifts operate on a pier for Navy to support Navy operations and resupply? Absolutely. Fuel, there's a lot of commonality that we can work together in terms of equipment and capability, and everybody's got to eat. So the total requirement of rations should be considered by location to meet the requirements of all. That sounds very easy, but we are institutionally built to not bring the total requirement together. And so we have to be very intentional about, as we build joint theater distribution centers, to make them truly joint and not individual or independent organizations that are kind of coexisting together. But the ultimate aim of these is to have, when we train, for example, I'll use the Philippines for example. We go do Balcatan, Salcanib every year. We spend a lot of money moving equipment there and back. Placing that equipment in a joint theater distribution center to be used at every exercise gives us, reduces the overall cost. It allows us to have the right HADR equipment in position if any kind of contingency were to happen. It builds the contracting architecture we need to understand what capabilities are out there. It employs local community. I think of the maintenance we've done, we had about 45 Filipino laborers in the initial portion, some of which had been working in Kuwait and other locations before, and were just great partners and had the capability. Pulling them in helps that community, and it also gives us more deterrent effect as we are seeing and and really a part of that organization. And then it sets conditions for bringing in the reserve component, as I mentioned earlier. If we have to wait on their equipment to show up, the time they have to rehearse and train is very limited. If they can fall in regionally aligned on equipment and execute their mission, we have done a lot to increase the overall readiness in the region by having that capability forward. So those are the main components of the Joint Theater Distribution Centers and the effectiveness that they can bring to the theater.
And right now, it's still somewhat nascent, I would say, but we're actually running the beginning of a joint TDC in the First Island chain right now. And I think you had said it, we have to do one of everything. Let's do one. Let's feed people out of the TDC. Let's try and cross-level between the services. So we're doing it now, and I think and there's some failures, and I think, General Manhan, you said you got to be prepared to fail. Look, we acknowledge that we're not perfect, and every time we're not, we hear about it, and that's okay, because we're all striving towards a common goal. But I think the TDC concept, it was a concept 3 years ago. It was one PowerPoint slide 3 years ago, and today we're doing it. And so I think the theater is moving. We're C- with remarkable speed, though. So we're going to get, while you're complaining about commissary parking spots in the line at the pharmacy, somebody's going to send you an email, sir, and let you know how good it's going. Because it is, this theater is going very rapidly, and I think that TDC, the initial one, supporting Battle of Gatan, South Carolina right now, and then we start ordering things. And we start trying to access that airfield. Let's go for broke. And let's fail a few times, but I think it's a wonderful concept, and we're doing it. We're doing it.
You know, I got a question. Actually, I'm going to call it a jump ball question, right? For any and all. And it starts with a statement from our audience. And the writer says, hey, it's great to see everything organized to the point of the staffs being focused on coordination in all you're talking about today, in the detail of what you're talking about it. So the question from the audience is, are you using any AI tools in your efforts to optimize all the data points, languages, and timelines involved? I had to get the AI question in there. But okay. It's a jump ball.
We are. I've got a thing that I've used as a tool coming out of Mobility Guardian last year that would, provide some structure, and I didn't know Israel was going to happen, so, we thought we were going to have some pretty focused time, and it turns out not to be true, but a structure that my staff could get, the lessons observed into lessons learned, and we have a shot clock on it that's in my office. I got a shot clock counting down to 30 June that is driving the staff to get these 10 lines down to 0. And the way you get to 0 is you get things done, or it gets into a position of governance where there's normal governance that can eventually close it out. Some of them are very long term. Those 10 things generally fall into 4 categories. The first is data, decisions, development, and then discipline. Can we just be the team that decides, not to blame the tyranny of the urgent, for why we couldn't shape the future? So this data and decisions is really where the AI is coming in. So we've, in my Air Operations Center, you can make a phone call to it, you can send an email to it, you can text to it, you can use an aircraft system, you can use traditional radios and stuff like that. All of that is very unstructured. And so what we're really trying to do is use AI to get the data to a structured point so that we can then collaborate in new ways and plan in new ways. And to a certain extent, the way we plan is still very much, if you were someone that served in my AOC maybe 20 years ago, you could probably come back and still figure it out. There might be some new terms, but there's still some process that I think that can be updated with the use of AI. So everything from the data to what we do with the data when it comes in, and then certainly how we plan and how we sense the environment. In fact, we went to 18th Airborne Corps and synced with General Donahue and his team and looked at all the things that they're doing with AI and the predictive tools and the machine learning and all that. We spent a day with them. We've done exercises with them, and then we're moving forward with some of those paths that he helped illuminate. Over.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. I had the great pleasure to work for General Kurilla in CENTCOM who kind of started, I would offer, a little bit of what 18 Airborne Corps as he departed the European theater, came into CENTCOM, and he really pushed that element in CENTCOM. But again, you'll hear maybe I'm a broken record. There's an opportunity here, but there's also a risk. And right now is that the risk is, yes, AI is being incorporated, but it's unilateral. It's not taking into consideration the ability to consume the data from your coalition partners, because some of the systems that we're incorporating don't talk to one another. And that's a big issue, but there's policy issues incorporated in that. But when you're looking at the sustainment enterprise, when you start to bring and you start to have the challenges, the tyranny of distance, the water, but the capabilities the allies will bring to fill some of those gaps, how do you do that if you can't feed that data in, and now you have this exquisite platform that basically can be used in one sense, and then you have to do a swivel chair back to a PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. And so the opportunity is we know that now. The opportunity is that we are at that point where we should be incorporating that at the earliest point, while we're continuing to develop and integrate these into combatant commands, into different processes, different exercises, and we should try and fail. Because I think if we incorporate it into some of these exercises, or you made it a training objective, we would quickly fail. We'd see it, but that would be all right. That's an opportunity to then start to pick away, because industry owns some of this too. Industry can help us get there, in being able to talk to one another. So when they're building whatever it is that we're buying, and it's being able to talk to one another, because otherwise we're just going to build an exquisite AI platform which will take in the greatest portion of the enterprise, bar none, which is the U.S. side, but it won't take the other part, which may be a critical part to what we need to be successful.
Thanks. Any other comments?
Well, we're not an AI company. We're doing base ops, but we're going to, and so I think AI companies would love to do that. We're kind of a blue collar company, but we're going to come back and we're going to start making proposals based on what we understand is out there to do certain things. We'll start in the Philippines with maybe some 5G, some networking. We're going to take a run at that. So the question was, are you doing it? From our perspective, the answer is no. But we think we need to, because there's no way to do what we've got to do in phase 3 the way we behave in phase 0. But none of us can get away with doing this in phase 3. It would be a disaster. So we're going to make some proposals here in the next few months so we can come on board, and we'll ask for permission. We'll get a yes or we'll get a no. It won't be terribly expensive, but we have to start aggregating our data so that we can think of really good questions to ask our data to get after operational maneuver. Can we maneuver there? Is that spot ready? And so no, but we're going to try.
Mm. Here's a question that I think I'm going to throw over for an answer in kind of two directions. The first is, as the person who's responsible for setting the sustainment, you, General Helwig, and the person that's responsible for ensuring that the sustainment gets to the right place at the right time, Joe Mahan. So first to you, General Helwig. Here's the question. How are we protecting the Indo-Pacific Joint Interior Lines from the sustainment and resource-intensive requirements in Europe and the Middle Eastern regional conflicts? So first to you, sir.
So I think, what we're doing in the Pacific is, highlighting the requirements across the region, and then actually taking those requirements and, kind of as we've talked about, practically laying them out using operation pathways to show and demonstrate why those requirements are needed and why they're needed, where they're needed. And I think from that perspective, that helps, provide a good reason, kind of solidifies what's important in this theater and why it's important to maintain that capability in the theater writ large. We've got to continue that effort and operate at the requirement, not at what we currently have. So in many cases, as part of Operation Pathways, for example, if we have, I'll use watercraft as an example, the maintenance rate on watercraft isn't great, but many times what we were doing is just saying, okay, well, we only have 2 available, therefore the requirement is 2. But if the requirement was actually 5, and we're unable to do things as part of campaigning because we're short, due to maintenance lead time or a variety of other reasons, then we need to make sure that we are broadcasting the true requirement, not what we currently have on hand and capable. And I think that helps in the conversation, with the building and with other places on illustrating the urgency and the need to keep those requirements in the theater or to build additional capability to meet those things. And so that also helps us with conversations about, offshore support vessels or any kind of contracted capability that we know is probably going to be fundamental to any operation that we do, but that in a exercise may not be highlighted because, if you only say you need 2, then your requirement to go out and get one doesn't really generate any kind of response in terms of, how much does that cost? Where do we get it? Who's the vendor? What contracting vehicle do we use? How do we build out that network? Which are all fundamental questions that we need answered in our theater. And then, more broadly, how do we stimulate that activity to draw more of industry into the Pacific so that they're able to meet those demands at the time that we need it? Because if we just wait, it won't be there.
And General Minahan, you kind of mentioned some of this friction in your earlier comments. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, it really highlights to me a couple things. The first would be you just need to decide to protect the Indo-PACOM equities with everything else going on. I mean, there's been 3 administrations in a row that have been very clear about the imperative of the Pacific. 2 that supplied an NDS that was very clear, extremely clear, not only about the imperative Pacific, but the exact challenge that we have. So I've never been in a unit that had enough time, money, or people. I've never been in it. And I get this question a lot where it's like, hey, sir, you say Pacific, 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 but then I'm always back in the sand again, standing in a DFAC line at Al-Udeid. Okay? And that's true. So make the decision to protect the equities within Indo-PACOM as directed by our elected officials. Okay? Going back to my previous question, let's not blame a less than optimal future because we decided that the tyranny of the urgent was too extreme that we couldn't obey the guidance given to us by our elected officials. So figure it out. I'm not saying burn people into the ground, but I'm saying make the decision to be the team that says, we're going to both handle the tyranny of the urgent and the long-term simultaneously. Does that mean we work hard? Absolutely. Does it mean there's weekends that are burned? Sometimes. Does it mean that I've got to completely focus on, let's hypothetically say 7 October, I've got to go into complete crisis mode on something that I didn't know 24 hours before, okay? And when that's handled, I can come back up and say, roger that, where we synced up on the last effort when it came to the Indo-Pacific and preserving those equities. So, there has got to be some grit. These are not things that are easily solved. So we have to be the team that displays the grit, the courage, and the resolve to say, this is what our elected officials want. This is what we've been ordered to do. Let's decide to do it. Let's find a way that we can sustain it, but sustain it at a high level so that those that may have to actually execute this stuff are proud of what we did.
Thanks, sir. Steve, an industry perspective, what do you think are some of the critical logistic gaps that industry can assist in supporting, especially when it comes to experimentation within exercises?
I want to go back and talk a little bit about the protection, if I could, first, before I answer that. At some point, you're not going to be able to protect everything. And so what I would submit, especially in this theater, that when we're talking about interior lines, the interior lines, again, need to be supported by a web of partners supporting those interior lines. And we say strategic movement, It really will be a level of strategic maneuver into theater, depending on what our posture is at that time. And so I'm all about the web. And so to answer that question, what industry has to do is we have to cast a wide net. Look, we get requirements, and industry's not going to go out and spend industry money on a requirement that doesn't exist. We do what we're told to do, that we're paid to do. That's what my company does. And we're average in that way. But what we owe you, and we owe you, is every time there's an exercise, we've got to cast a wide net and bring in other vendors that have not supported an exercise before. And we said, we've got enough notification now. We're going to use you. It's called Balakatan Salakanib. It's over here. We need you to help us with this. Because what we're doing in Balakatan Salakanib, multiply that by 10, 20, if we go to phase 3. And so what we do is, and we're doing now, what we're trying to do is, not just subcontracted labor, but vendors. How do we get, we support Kwajalein. We run Kwajalein. How do we get stuff, not just parts, but stuff into Kwaj? Can we just keep on using the West Coast United States through? Should we have vendors in Guam that support that? Should we have vendors on the Penn that come this way and support that? So creating that web, supporting that web with bona fide requirements that we have enough in advance to build that web is how you build interior lines and then sustain interior lines. And that's kind of what we're all about here. And so the more notice we have, the more I can pay that debt. I owe this theater of that. And I will tell you, when I talk to my chain of command in my current company, we think we owe those that we support the best web we can provide.
Well, I'll tell you, we only have a few minutes left, and the comments that you all have made have just been fascinating. A couple times I wanted to jump up and go, amen, but I'm the moderator. I'm supposed to Jack told me to keep my enthusiasm under lock and key, so I'm going to do that. So we're going to go into the lightning round with the last few minutes we have, and what I'd like for each of you to do, starting with Joe Minahan, moving down, if you could take a minute or so and just any closing comments you'd like to make that you did not get to cover, sir.
Certainly. I'll frame it in terms of our oath of office. The most important line in our oath of office is that we will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which we are about to enter. So it's both a recipient of all of the lines before it, and it's the line that's closest to God. So, our command equities in putting our echelons in the best possible place to be successful is absolutely what should keep you up at night, what we should grade our worthiness of, and what should drive the majority of our energy. So we have an enormous obligation here. And this obligation is for the world order, it's for the peace, prosperity, and prestige of the United States, it's for partners and allies. It's certainly, to the success of the joint team, the coalition team, certainly me as an airman, me as a mobility airman. And so this drive is absolutely essential that we all please do be bothered by that. When it comes to, the amazing opportunity and privilege that I've had to serve, as an airman in a C-130, from punk lieutenant to punk general, what that offered me the ability to do was interact with the joint team at a very early age before I knew really what that meant. I thought I was just dropping paratroopers at name your army base, flying cargo throughout Europe, the Middle East, certainly a lot of time in the sand. And so, this is about our success. We should never be parochial, that we forget that this is about the joint team and the coalition team and the greater good of this world. And the opportunity that I've had, I've saved my best job for last. There is no doubt in my mind that the best job I've had in this Air Force, as awesome as it was flying, as awesome it was commanding at lower ranks, to have the integration and the opportunity to influence at this level has been the absolute privilege of my life. So I'm going to turn from, quarterback to cheerleader, and I'm proud to do that. I'm going to go back to 70s hair. I think I'm going to go to the 70s decade, find out what it means to have hair touch ears again. But one thing I never lose sleep about, and I'll end on this one, I never doubt our decisive victory. the readiness that delivers deterrence, delivers decisive victory. I never doubt that decisive victory. That is a comment on the joint team and our partners and allies. I do want that decisive victories to be so obnoxious, to be so overwhelming, to be so shocking that we just if someone makes the decision to take us on, that it's just the worst decision they ever make. So that gap and that widening of the gap is where I want the focus to happen after Mike Minahan is Mr. Minahan. And I have full faith and confidence it happen. I really appreciate this opportunity here. I look forward to meeting you after the end here, but to spend time with this great panel, with this great service is the treat of my life. So thank you.
So another amen moment. I will just not do it though. But the only, we've been friends a long time. There's just one more thing. So you're right. We do complain as retirees. Me and Bob and soon Charlie will complain about the lines at the commissary. But I just want to let you know one thing. Bob already knows this. Charlie, you need to know this. You need to know this. When you go out to your driveway and you sit in the back right seat of your car, the car will not move. I had to learn that. Yeah. I had to learn that the hard way.
Air Force doesn't have drivers. I got that figured out. So,
go ahead, sir.
Hey, thanks. Certainly thankful to be part of this. But I'm just going to come back to the fact that the strength that we have comes from the fact we're together. It's that coalition mindset. It's the coalition will that has been there before, that has been proven, and it's what doesn't exist in other places. And I think, I'm going to take liberty to speak for some of my coalition colleagues, but, there is a certain amount of pride when you can soldier or you can fly as a wingman or a ship beside you, that you're with the United States. And that pride comes because y'all, that's my cultural aspect, I just mentioned. Noted. Y'all bring us together to have these discussions. But what I'd ask is we cannot stay still. We have to continue to evolve. We have to challenge one another. We have to not sprinkle fairy dust on the coalition problem. We have to actually let it fail and show us where we need to get better. Because that's the only way we can pursue readiness. And as we've heard about, we'll never be ready enough, and nor should we stand still and accept it. We should always be pursuing greater readiness. And that readiness comes from being together jointly, but also as a coalition team.
Thanks, sir. And thanks for using our U.S. Southern vernacular. I'm a Southerner. So y'all just means one person. All y'all is them.
I continue to learn.
All y'all.
Sir, thanks, and I really appreciate being here with this great panel as well. I think what's been illustrated here is the importance of Operation Pathways in facilitating sustainment as a warfighting function and finding practical examples to apply the challenges of this theater in ways that people can get their heads wrapped around and start working at that tactical level all the way up to the strategic, to solve those problems in real time, and then to feed that back into a virtuous cycle that continues to build upon itself and get after some of these problems that we know exist. If you just talk about tyranny of distance and say, it can seem overwhelming, but if you start to break it into its different pieces and parts and apply people and process and organizations to those problems, I think you get a much better result. Doing that requires training, sustainment, like every other warfighting function, and building those reps and sets through Operation Pathways to build those joint theater distribution centers and those interior lines that are so critical to being ready in this theater and to be set in this theater. And all of that's great, and it's important from a sustainment perspective to pursue it across the joint force and the coalition. But what it ultimately gets after is something that General Minahan talked about that I think is critical, and that is we're training the next generation to understand where they live, where they sit, to operate with discipline and initiative, not just within their own service, but across the joint force and across our coalition partners. And if I go back to the first illustration that I started with during Talisman Sabre, when we were dealing with all of these different issues tied to getting those missiles up to that firing range, what the most satisfying part of that whole conversation was is, I remember after one of the briefings that we had, one of the colonels came up to me from the Australian Defence Force and said, wow, I'm kind of surprised that we're like actually able to work this together. There's no formal command relationship, but when you have everybody sitting together, thinking about the problem and understanding what the problem is, to your point, we're able to do a whole lot, and we're better than the sum of our parts. So I think that's going to be critical. It's critical here. That human dynamic and applied to this future problem set will get after 90% of the problems and solve them much better than we'll be able to at echelons above reality.
Thank you, sir. Steve.
I realize that clock has just turned red,
Yeah.
and so I appreciate that. Look, this is the Fight Tonight theater as far as I'm concerned. And I love the level of urgency that I see in conversations and the level of collaboration across allies and partners in industry. And I think the sky's the limit for this theater, but the mentality in this theater is just, it's a pleasure to be supporting the theater. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the panel. It was nice to meet you and see you all again. And that's it from industry.
Well, listen, I want to thank all y'all on the stage and all y'all out in the audience. And thank you to AUSA, also our leader, General Flynn. Thank you, sir, for always asking me to be here. I really enjoy being with you and learning as well. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your service. And that concludes our panel. Thank you.
I told you, wow, that was a great panel. We're going to take a short break, very short break.